putting out many updates about cybersecurity and reminders about cybersecurity in the news. And the SEC is one of those entities that's putting out a lot about cybersecurity. As you may have seen, many things that the SEC is putting forth as initiatives that have to do with cybersecurity. And as such, since 2014, the SEC has made cybersecurity a top initiative, and it's one of their examination one of their points for any examination that they are out doing with any firms. And so as such, we've seen risk alerts that have been published by the SEC, and we've seen a lot of findings that they've published about what has occurred from their interactions with BDs and investment advisors. Based upon this, there's kind of been a framework for how the SEC is looking to have cybersecurity programs set up, where they are looking to have firms customize each one of their cybersecurity programs to meet the needs of that firm based upon the systems that are utilized and the potential risk issues that are associated with the way that the business model is structured. And as such, we see that whenever there are findings from the SEC, it has to do with whether the firm is actually taking a cybersecurity policy and is creating it as a custom cybersecurity policy for that reflects the systems and processes of their firm, or do they just have a generic cybersecurity policy that doesn't really go into the details of how their firm works? And then the other thing is that the SEC wants to have cybersecurity policies reflect the processes and the controls and any risks that are associated with the firm. It's okay to identify risks in your policy. Your policy does not have to say that you do not have any risks associated with your systems. But what you need to do is have a identification of how those risks are mitigated internally, and then making sure that you're doing the things that are required in order to have your systems patched, updated, and any known security vulnerabilities dealt with. So Wes will get into more of those details about how to kind of review your company's cybersecurity policy. But these are what the SEC is coming back to many firms about, is making sure that it is truly customized to the way that you're doing business. After that, the way that the policies will then reflect the way that each individual who's brought into the firm needs to interact with those systems. So in general, there needs to be a process for onboarding a new advisor or a new IAR to the firm, and how that advisor would start interacting with the systems of that firm. And then if there is anybody who's being terminated out of the firm, to also make sure that the access to those systems are terminated upon that IAR no longer being part of the firm. And finally, it's always a risk area that needs to be highlighted, but mobile devices and connectivity to systems through mobile devices is always going to be a point of contention, and one that you want to make sure that you have a very detailed process as to how people can utilize mobile devices and what needs to be on those mobile devices in order to prevent potential loss of data through those mobile devices. All right. So when it comes to cybersecurity, we know that this will be asked about if you're going through an examination. But what we also know is that there's going to be kind of general updates that you'll want to periodically make throughout your year of life of compliance. And as such, we recommend that there are time periods throughout the year where you look at your systems and say, one, is there a way that we can make sure that all of our systems are properly updated and patched with the latest security patches for that system? One of the major things that we saw earlier this year with the ransomware attacks had to do with the fact that people did not install the most up-to-date security patches for Windows on their computers. And therefore, there was this team that was able to identify that weakness and then go into those computers and create these ransomware attacks. None of this, and not the ransomware attacks and not the big Equifax breach, neither of those were out of the blue things where a hacker just stumbled upon something. They were coordinated based upon known vulnerabilities in systems that are out there. And so the biggest thing that you can do whenever you are putting together your cybersecurity plan is to make sure that you have a process for ensuring that your systems are kept up to date, and any patches that have to do with security are properly implemented across all computer systems. So we live in a connected world, and all of the computer systems are connected together when we're doing business. And so making sure that each one of those has the proper security surrounding it, so that there can't be somebody who has a vulnerability in one of their computers that's then used to exploit all of the computers that are associated with your firm. And so that's kind of a general overview of where we are with cybersecurity. The SEC is always going to continue to make it a priority to talk about cybersecurity with individual firms and make sure that you have things updated. And then not just at the federal level, but many of the states are also implementing cybersecurity initiatives in order to ensure that state registered advisors are also keeping up their end of the bargain. So the whole purpose of this webinar will be to kind of go through what types of things you can start doing if you haven't done them already in order to prepare your systems for any potential issues from a cybersecurity standpoint, and make sure that you also are translating those system updates into the policies and procedures that you utilize on an everyday basis, so that we can show not only that your systems are protected, but that your policies and processes in-house are not creating any potential issues. So with that introduction, I want to hand things over to Wes Stillman, and Wes will be now taking many of the details of creating a good cybersecurity program.
Thank you, everyone. Do we have control of the mouse at this point?
It should be with you right now.
Right now. Okay. First of all, thank you very much. Great start to the presentation. Thank you all for joining the discussion today. As mentioned, I am Wes Stillman, CEO and founder of RightSize Solutions. We've been providing services to the financial services industry with secure technology solutions for over 15 years. I want to take you back just for a brief second to 1996. Some of you may, on this call, have been in the business world at that time. I was a senior technology architect working on security and disaster recovery, business continuity. And while you're imagining things, imagine me with a lot less gray hair, if you would. I'd appreciate that. I had just met a person who has become a very good friend of mine. And you know how those first conversations go, they're a little awkward. So, hi, how are you? Nice day outside. Good to meet you. By the way, what do you do? And he told me, he goes, well, I'm a day trader. Subject I had absolutely no knowledge of and really still don't. But I was just mesmerized listening to him. I mean, he had all these strategies for shorting stock and going long and different strategies that were just way over my head. But then he told me, he goes, I'm making so much more trading than I am at my real job. At that point, I quit listening. So let's fast forward a few years to 2002, right? We all learned firsthand about surviving a true disaster at that point. Large financial firms survived because of the professionals that had planned and tested for the big what-if questions, right? Many smaller firms did not survive, like my friend. They needed professional help. And that's when I opened the doors of RightSize Solutions. And I'm very proud to say that we were the very first to provide small financial firms with true enterprise-level security and cloud. We didn't know to call it a cloud back then, but hosted solutions. And that continues to be our core mission today. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today speaking to all of you. So the real question is, why are you guys here? I mean, after all, your core mission is serving your clients, right? Managing, preserving, hopefully growing their wealth, right? Financial services is really all about the relationships you have with your clients, not necessarily cybersecurity. But I'm willing to bet you everyone listening today recognizes the reality that technology is the enabler of your services and that it really is a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it enables our business. At the same time, on the other side of that sword, it has the potential to wound or even undercut the trust you've worked so hard to build with your clients and even put your entire business at risk. And I believe that's the reason you're here today. The size and shape of risk is constantly changing and growing. What I'm about to show you is a little alarming, right? And no, it's not really a picture of one of your kids' video games. This was recorded last week. It's by Norse Corporation, and it shows live cyber attacks from around the world. It's pretty impressive to watch it. If you get 2 minutes, jump on map.norsecorp.com, and you can see a live version of this. Each one of those little laser beams actually represents an attack. As we mentioned, 2016 kind of gave us some amazing stats regarding breaches. I'm really sorry to say 2017 looks to be another record year for breaches. The Equifax breach alone may have impacted 143 million people, 14 million people with the Verizon hack, and that WannaCry ransomware that was mentioned, it plagued thousands in a massive global attack. It's estimated that the global ransomware damage and cost associated with that damage are predicted to exceed over $5 billion, that's with a B, dollars in 2017. And whatever you do, don't get me started on the SEC hack. There is little doubt that these breaches have the potential to wreak havoc on our political system, our personal relationships, and even our economic systems. As was just mentioned, the SEC and Department of Labor are really cracking down. They're increasing their regulations and their auditing capabilities. The observation that came out in August 2017 indicated that, we're doing a pretty good job of getting policies out there, but we're not doing anything with them. They're kind of collecting dust sitting on the shelf. And they're suggesting we need to start enforcing those policies. I think we all know what comes next, right? You need to have a policy, got to enforce it. If you're not doing it, who knows where that leads. I'm here to tell you there is no cure-all. There is no one-stop shopping for cybersecurity. And I don't think any single group or solution is out there that's just going to solve all the problems. I was at the IA Watch conference here, this month, and I met one of the lawyers for Equifax who was involved in the breach, defending the breach. And his only recommendation was that you have to have a defensible approach to your cybersecurity. Right? As mentioned, you're going to have some risk involved, but you have to have some kind of defensible approach. So let's talk about the hackers for a minute. You know, who are they? What are they after? Who are they after? I don't know about you, but the word hacker kind of conjures up all kinds of crazy images for us, right? The faceless hoodie, the weird kid sitting in the basement eating Cheetos, banging on a computer. Whatever that picture is, it's probably wrong. What we should be picturing are well-funded criminal organizations, if not state organizations. History gives us a pretty clear picture of the progression of the capabilities. I'm sure most of you remember those early viruses and malware that kind of slowed down our computers, filled our screens with ads. But ransomware makes those early attacks look like child's play, right? And there are ways we can defend against it. There is clear evidence we are making progress, though, right? Especially larger companies. I doubt too many people on this call today worry too much about credit card theft, right? Just last month, I get a call from my bank asking me if I'm in Paris, France, because someone's trying to purchase something on one of my credit cards. And the reality is, I wasn't even concerned about it. I never saw any charges. I wasn't responsible for anything. Everything was taken care of, and they just simply reissued cards. But I can tell you, as someone with more than 30 years studying technology and security, that today's hackers are very sophisticated and have moved well beyond just stealing credit card information. Today, they are really after data and personal information. They sell it, they hold it hostage, they use it to manipulate you and individual companies for whatever they want. Large companies with very deep pockets and their own technology experts are making progress at really slowing down attacks against them. They do things like vulnerability testing 2, 3, 4 times a year. They also have internal audits. They hire dedicated staff. All things that small businesses probably aren't going to be able to do. Unfortunately, most of our protection efforts are still reactive, right? We can't do too much against viruses and hacks until we actually see them and know what those vulnerabilities are. I think artificial intelligence kind of holds the future for us, and we may see a lot of progress in the next few years with AI technology. But make no mistake about it, hackers are a lot of things, but they are not stupid. They know that the Bank of Americas of the world, the big financial institutions, make great targets, but they are also hardened targets. The real vulnerable targets are the firms with access to millions of dollars with little or no security. Kind of sounds like maybe some of the folks in this audience. What is really interesting to me is that larger firms are increasing their budgets to bolster their security and business continuity, while many smaller firms are actually cutting those costs. I'm often asked, how much do I need to spend and what should I spend it on? My answer is that this can't just be fixed just by buying something, and most importantly, you're not going to fix much of anything by simply moving to the cloud. The fact is, there is no simple answer. So what do we need to do? Let's begin to break it down a little bit. We think there's 3 key areas that every financial firm needs to focus on, right? The human factor, or what I like to call the weakest link. And that's where you have policies and training and culture. The second area is your arsenal. This is where you're going to develop your tools, your prevention, detection, enforcement capabilities. And last but not least is your battle plan, your contingency planning. What if? How would I if something happened? So what we're going to try to cover in the rest of this session is simply an introduction to these areas, certainly not a comprehensive plan. But you need to consider whatever you're putting in place as an iterative process. think what we've done in the past is we've kind of put our policies in place. Maybe we look at them once a year or so. Maybe we get our employees to sign a document. But the fact is, this has to be a living, breathing set of processes with active technology involved. We hope that these 10 tips are what every business should be at least considering, if not actually doing. So let's jump right in here. My dad used to tell me every time I'd ask him, I don't even know where to start this thing. And he would always say, well, why don't you just start at the beginning? And that's what we have to do here. You need to review what you already have, right? Picture for a moment that first time you bought a home, right? When I did it, I thought, man, I don't need anybody's help. I got this all figured out, right? A few years later, when I bought my second home, I knew better. I went out and I hired a professional. Look, you guys are professionals in the financial services world, not cybersecurity and not technology. You guys need some help with this. What you're going to have to be able to do to start with is you're going to have to do a detail inventory. You're going to have to look at all the end devices, PCs, Macs, iOS, any device that can access your business applications and data. You're going to have to look at all the protections you have in place, your patch management, antivirus, malware, firewalls, and that's just half of it. Then you have to turn around and do a data map. By a data map, what we're talking about there is where is the data? Might be in more places than you think. Who has access to that data? And the all-important question of how is that access controlled? We also strongly suggest looking at doing a vulnerability test. A vulnerability test should help you understand a little bit about some of the details of things like your patch management and the software and security you have in place. One last thing on this topic, you also have to be able to review your vendors' policies, their security policies, their backups, the return of your data, and contingency planning. I'd also strongly suggest you look at the contracts while you're there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this information to better understand what your weak points are and vulnerabilities really are. In short, this is the core information you need to assess your risk, right? It may also help you put together a security budget for what you're going to need. So let's talk a little bit about the human factors, policy, training, and culture for a minute. First of all, a security policy is a must-have, right? And it has to be enforceable. As already mentioned, the OCIE came out in 2015 and suggested that every security policy should cover at least 6 key areas. I'm going to walk down those here in just a second. The fact is, if you don't have a policy, you need one. You need to talk to your compliance team or AdvisorAssist. Talk to someone like RightSize Solutions for a sample policy, something that may help get you started. That inventory and data mapping that we were just talking about is the foundation that you're going to use to create these policies in these 6 areas. When you do your governance and your risk assessment, especially on the risk assessment side from the technology perspective, that inventory and data mapping information, you're going to be able to use that to look at it and assess where your risks are and associate what the risk is with each of those areas. And once you have that, then you can prioritize based upon the risk you assign. Based upon that priority of risk, you can then update your business and contingency and continuity type plans. Bottom line is this risk assessment is critical. It helps you to understand what you have in place, what is working with respect to minimizing your security and business risk, as well as maybe any holes you might have for compliance, and where you may have some gaps or areas that maybe you can improve in. Second area is access rights and controls. And this is such an important area, right? Let me read to you directly from the risk alert. Examiners may review how firms control access to various systems and data via management of user credentials, authentication, and authorization methods. That's a big job, right? So the bottom line is, how are you protecting the front door to all of your applications and data? This area is more concerned with controlling the access outside your environment. In other words, access to all the applications and data, both from an internal resource perspective, your employees, but also from a vendor perspective. The third area is data loss prevention. And to me, potentially, this is the most difficult area for anyone to understand, especially non-technical folks. But this is about managing the dissemination of personally identifiable information, PII. Right? We're talking about controlling the flow of information from inside your organization outbound. Right? How are you controlling what internal resources can and should be sending out to customers, and or just losing data when someone walks out the door? To be able to do this, you have to know what data you possess or have access to, where that information exists, or where it might exist, and who in your organization and or third parties have access to that information. The reason I say where it may exist is that, look, data may exist in an application or a storage vault or a file vault somewhere, but when you open that document, you got to understand where it actually exists. It's probably going to be on that device. Service provider management is the fourth area. You have to be able to do diligence on your partners. You have to understand what their policies and procedures are, and we're talking about third-party vendors, right? Someone like a RightSize, someone like your CRM or portfolio management or reporting. But there's also this concept of fourth-party management. And that's the idea that your vendor may be using one or more vendors to provide that application to you. So as a simple example, you may have a vendor providing you a CRM, but the question is, where is that CRM actually being housed, and where is the data being housed? Maybe it's AWS, maybe it's Rackspace, maybe it's their own site. But the fact is, if they're using a vendor, that's what we mean by the fourth-party management. Employee training and testing, right? The fifth area. We have to be able to create some kind of culture of awareness and security. This area is what really helps prevent accidental breaches. And we probably are going to need to tailor our training in this area to your specific business and or the specific job roles within your organization. I want to mention here, don't forget about social media. There has been a 780% increase in social media-related crime in just 4-year span. Daniela Fava of TD Ameritrade did a great presentation. I don't know, maybe some of you might have heard it, but she mentioned as part of her presentation what happens when we look at big data and when we analyze anonymized data from your social media. If we can get 500 posts of your Facebook, just anonymized data and metadata, we know more about what you're thinking than you do. It's pretty scary. The sixth area is incident response. Examiners may assess whether firms have established policies, assigned roles, assessed system vulnerabilities, and developed plans to address possible future events. Well, to me, this area is the culmination of all the other areas that we just mentioned, right? It's what are you going to do with all that information? The fact is, technology alone will not prevent a breach. The number one cause of all data breaches are phishing emails. And if you haven't guessed it by now, most phishing attacks start by gathering information from social media. But I believe that the weakest link in our organization, that human factor, can actually become one of the strongest defense mechanisms. We recommend companies like AdvisorArmor, KnowBe4, FishMe. All of those companies have great services that can help you train your employees, test their competency, and track their progress. Bottom line is we have to make security part of our company culture and our daily lives. I'm sorry, by any chance, does anybody know what time it is right now? I would be willing to bet many of you turned around and looked at your clock, watch, whatever, your smartphone, just to see if you can answer that question, right? Kind of natural behavior. Someone asks you a question and you have a tendency to answer it. We're kind of brought up that way. When I was young, my dad would say, hey, gentlemen, just ask you a question. Be polite, answer the question, right? It's natural for us. I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb to say everyone on this conference has a strong desire to please our customers. They ask us a question, we try to respond with the right answer. But that's where the training comes into play. We had one RIA, larger RIA, had a philosophy of train the trainer. So they sent off a gentleman, trained him on cybersecurity, phishing attacks, what to look for, you name it. He came back and he trained the rest of the staff. Who do you suppose was the only person in the company that got trapped on a phishing attack and actually transferred over $1 million illegally? That's right, it was the trainer. So it happens, right? Here's the thing. We need to put some things in place to help us do what's easy, right? Remember the old easy button on the commercial? We need an easy security button. So tools that will help you easily block spam and phishing emails, which is the push of a button, is imperative. You need to have some kind of process to report suspicious emails or activity and or notify us that we're about to send out an email that we don't want sent out. So for example, in our environment today, we have policies in place, technology policies that actually enforce it real time, so that if I'm entering an email and I put something that looks like an account number or social security or words that are in the policy lexicon, we actually get notification right there on that email before we hit the send button that, you know, there's something wrong with this email. It's going against our policies. We can even block that email or maybe even send it off to a supervisor if that's what's required in the policy. So there are tools out there that will help you with this real time. The other key area here is password simplifications. We strongly recommend password vaults, right? Using something like single sign-on, modern authentication, where maybe using those technologies, you don't even have to worry about passwords at that point. And last but not least, simple things in your training and human factor, tip of the day, right? Little reminders that security is important, and here are some things that you can do today, and or even alerts about what the latest attacks might be. We believe that internal resources are the linchpin of security, and it is a serious part of the job. In fact, we think cybersecurity is just part of your fiduciary duty. So the next area we're going to look at are the tools and the weapons that you can employ to really help secure your environment. So let's start with that access policy, who, what, where, and when. It's pretty interesting. A study of the LinkedIn breach showed that over 1 million accounts had a password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember that easy button? So why are we talking about passwords again, right? You may have your data stored securely in cloud-based applications or vaults, maybe on a server in your office, and it may be encrypted. But the fact is, how do you access it? You know, the minute you enter your user ID and password, all that data and information is just opened up to you. In other words, your password is really the front door to everything that you have. So what we need to be able to do is protect those passwords. We need to be able to have complex passwords. Now, up to this point, we've always been told we have to change these complex complex passwords quite often. Now, we mentioned we suggest using password vaults. And we know they're not a perfect tool, and yes, some of them have been hacked, but if you can use passcards in association with your password vaults so that internal resources don't actually know your credentials to the business applications, it's just a passcard. And in order to use the passcard, you have to be in a secure environment. That's just one way of improving how password vaults might be able to be used. It's pretty interesting. The NIST came out and indicated this year, in fact, a couple months ago, that the process of constantly changing complex passwords is actually less secure because we have a tendency to write them down. So we've started recommending to our clients, use complex passwords, have those policies in place, but where you can, turn on single sign-on, which is what the NIST is recommending, as well as multi-factor authentication. In case some of you don't really know or understand what single sign-on is, the technical definition is it's a session and user authentication service that permits a user to use one set of login credentials to access a multiple of applications. So for example, in our environment, you log in using your credentials, you'll click an icon, and let's say Black Diamond or Redtail or whatever the application might be, and there is no password. It bypasses that user ID and sign-on because you've already been authenticated, and programmatically the two systems know and understand that. Multi-factor authentication, I think most of us know what that is by now. It's something you know and something you have. So typically you'll enter your credentials, your smartphone will buzz, it'll give you a key that you have to enter, or maybe you just press a button to approve the sign-on. Encryption. Well, you need to use it, period. And I know there's all kinds of stories out there about, encryption maybe isn't protecting everything and it can be broken, and maybe it can be with the right amount of horsepower and tenacity. But let me ask you this. How long do you think it takes a locksmith to open that deadbolt on your front door? I'm guessing you probably still lock it at night, right? This encryption stuff isn't just for geeks anymore. This is just part of our daily lives. But I do want to caution you about a couple of things, right? We should be encrypting all devices and all hard drives or whatever we want to call them, storage devices today, right? Every end device. It helps protect those devices when they decide to stay in the cab when you get out, or maybe they want a second cup of coffee when you leave the coffee shop. Bottom line is, if those devices are encrypted, there's very little harm that can be done. That's encrypting data at rest. We also have to encrypt data, especially in transit. So what we mean by that is that you should be going to websites that are SSL protected. In other words, HTTPS is what you should see at the beginning of that. That's when you're working on the information. Transit also means that you may be submitting an email or a document to a client that contains private information. Of course, that has to be encrypted. So use encrypted email, use your secure website portals. I have to tell you, though, encryption is only as good as the key and who has access to the key that unlocks everything. Right? So when you're doing those vendor analysis, typically an admin of a system has access so that they can do things like backup and maintenance and storage expansion, all those things. It is interesting, one key tip here, if you want to try to prevent ransomware, you might want to consider not using the admin sign-on your individual devices. Create a second a second sign-on that is not an admin. Use that on your day-to-day usage, and when you have to update the system or applications, log on as the admin. That will help prevent ransomware from hitting your end devices. I will tell you, it's pretty interesting, the Wi-Fi hack that just came out. I don't know if any of you heard of it or not, but if you haven't, it's all over the internet. What's interesting about it is they didn't break the encryption, they simply turned it off. Pretty novel approach to things. The other thing that I want to point out here is you need to communicate with your clients about encryption, right? It has to be used. I know it's a little bit like the Patriot Act, right? We're giving up some civil liberties and maybe some convenience for safety, and that's really what's happening here. We may be giving up some convenience for safety of their private information. We suggest a layered approach. So for example, maybe you need to send a document with private information to your client. Use your share file or secure portal that you're going to use, or encrypted email. But first, encrypt the document with a common key that only you and your client know about. That way, if anything goes wrong anywhere along in the process, at least there's another layer of encryption there. Just to give you an idea, there may be some alternatives that you might want to consider as well. We had a client that was trying to get private information, secure information from their site to a trust company on a daily schedule. And they had to hit a certain cutoff. And by the time they got through encrypting all the emails to get over to the trust company, they were missing their daily cutoff. So instead of trying to encrypt each individual email, we simply established an encrypted tunnel between our email server and the trust company's email server, and all traffic was encrypted going to them, which solved the problem for their timeline. The point here is there may be more than one way to solve the problem. Mobile computing, there's no doubt about it. It is here to stay, right? Cisco did research back in 2014 and saw that it was increasing over 69%. It's predicted to increase tenfold by 2019. But there is a paradox in mobile computing, and that is that many businesses, mainly larger organizations, are moving away from that individual device, BYOB, right? Bring your own device, BYOD, to more of a centralized environment and something known as containerization. What's interesting about this is the key reason for this move isn't really about security, but it's more about employee privacy. Most businesses don't really want to try to maintain control over an employee's device and the use of that device, nor do the employees want that oversight. More to the point, it's very expensive and difficult for the companies to actually do that. The key to this is that all the information and access to core business applications are controlled so that only valid users on registered secure devices can access those applications and information. And it only stays within that environment, right? So that second part of this is to ensure that the information cannot be shared. Good example of that is I can't just email myself a list of all the client's social security numbers to some private email, right? There are tools and capabilities out there to prevent that and to make sure that the information stays where it belongs. Don't have enough time to go into all those tools, but the fact is they do exist and it can be done to an extent. Here's the extreme example that I get quoted by my team quite often. And how are you going to stop me from taking my phone and the camera and taking a picture of what's on the screen? And the fact is we can't. But the point is we can do a much better job of controlling the dissemination of that information than what we're doing today. A few suggestions are ensure your business-based web apps can only be accessed from secure environments. Make sure that the dissemination of that private information is controlled to the best of your ability. Ensure company email can only be accessed from encrypted devices. And last but not least, from a philosophical standpoint in your company, consider security over convenience. The last area is your battle plan, right? This last area on the plan for when you need to recover from a disaster. So it's not a question of if you have to deal with cybersecurity, attack or a technology outage, but rather it's a question of when it's going to happen. We propose it may be time to give a little rethink to the cloud protection. Now, I hail from the great state of Kansas, the land of Oz, where Dorothy and Toto may be real, but trust me, the cloud is nothing more than a marketing term, and there is a man behind that cloud curtain. So don't be fooled that just because your data and or application is in the cloud, it is protected, or that it is someone else's responsibility. And that's not to say that data isn't safe while it's sitting in the cloud, but you also have to consider when it is in use and in transit. Again, as I mentioned before, when you open that file on the cloud, is it really on your device or is it in the cloud? And it's probably on whatever device you have. And you can't forget about those third-party integrations from application to application, CRM to portfolio management, and fourth-party relationships. Let me go back to that integration for a minute. When you do your vendor assessment, you need to understand how one vendor is getting access to the data of your clients at another vendor. That's also access control. The point here is that regardless of where a breach may occur, someone is looking to blame someone else. For example, with the Equifax breach, it didn't even take a week for class actions to start popping up. Let me further this thought a little bit. When you get a few minutes, just Google Office 365 and the word backup. Now, I got millions of hits, dozens of backup solutions popped up. So you might want to ask yourself, why are there so many business offerings out there to back up Microsoft Office 365 and your data? You might ask yourself, don't I already get that with Microsoft Office 365? And the answer is, to an extent. It's interesting the number of times that I'll hear something about, well, we're already in the cloud. We don't think we need any additional, IT services or security. And that may be true. You might not. But at the very least, you need to run that vulnerability test and at least look at what you already have or do an internal security audit. There's no doubt that this audience you're experts in your field, right? But would you recommend a financial expert to a person who thinks they have their retirement plan all set up because they bought a mutual fund? I don't know. So it's really important that you know and understand how your data is being protected. And keep in mind that the backups that may not be exactly what you think they are, especially with respect to the version controls. The all-important question of how fast can you get your data back and where you need, and what you need to do with that data once you get it back. We had an example where one client was using an online portfolio management system, Portfolio Center, and for trading reasons, they decided they wanted to bring that back in-house. And so when we put up Portfolio Center and we got that backup of their Portfolio Center database, it took several days for us to manipulate that database to even get it to work with Portfolio Center. So it's not like it's just, here's your data and you plug it in and make it work. All right. A few more thoughts on rethinking the cloud. Can you get a simple copy of your data or key data? And by that we mean, think about your CRM for a minute. You have tons of information in there. But the basic information, things like client name, address, phone number, email, all that could be put in a simple file so that if you lose access to your CRM system or maybe even the internet, right, you still have information that's non-volatile, kind of secure information that you can actually access and communicate with your clients with. Can you get access to a full backup of all your data? And what would you do with that information if you got it? So the bottom line is the cloud isn't perfect, right? It doesn't solve all the problems, but neither did putting a server in your back office. Yes, it raises some new concerns that maybe we didn't have to think about before, but it certainly has improved the industry's ability to expand capabilities and services. At the very least, it has shifted the burden of technology infrastructure management and security of that infrastructure to the application providers. It doesn't mean that it hasn't shifted the burden of data security and the contingency planning to them as well. The idea that cloud-based application service will never have an outage or fall to a cyber attack, in my opinion, is a very dangerous idea. It's not a matter of if, but when. We must expect an attack, a cybersecurity attack, or a technology failure. So the goal with your contingency planning is to minimize the risk of that breach or a technology outage, and it's going to be based on your policies that you have in place, training and awareness, and the technology you put in place to actually make all that work, right? Your antivirus, your multi-factor authentication, encryption, single sign-on, password vaults, and also your vendor assessments will help you understand what you're going to have to put in place. When you create that contingency plan, you need to know how you will protect your client's information, how your vendors are protecting that information, and when things begin to go south, you need to understand what the priority of what systems and data you need to continue operations. But we suggest doing that within a certain amount of time frame, right? What happens if it's out for a few hours, like an internet outage, versus a day or more, versus several days or a week? Those priorities will shift with that time frame. Last but not least, I get a lot of questions about cybersecurity insurance. We're not an insurance salesperson. We're not your compliance officer. Our advice to our clients is that you need to understand exactly what that policy covers and what the requirements of coverage actually is. And last but not least, cybersecurity insurance really doesn't equate to cybersecurity. Practice makes perfect, right? Reality is that none of us really know how good our battle plan or contingency plan is until we have to use it. Practicing and testing some of those technology policies on a regular basis will certainly help. You need to have some kind of monitoring in place because all of those policies and technology for prevention and or detection are great, but you also have to have processes in place to deal with the notifications from your monitoring system. I don't know how many of you have seen that commercial, but where the bank's being robbed and lady laying on the floor looks up at what looks like a security guard and says, "Do something," right? And he looks at her and says, "Ma'am, I'm just a security monitor, right? I'm not a security guard," right? We have to be able to do something when our systems are trying to tell us something's wrong. You might also want to test your vendors, right? Try to restore a file or try to go back in a certain point of time and see how far back you can go. Run a vulnerability test. That's going to help you tremendously, at least to understand where your patch management is, where your vulnerabilities are in your network as well. And then make sure that you are actually enforcing your policies. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Just a quick shameless plug for our company. Our cloud-based solutions help our clients access their applications and data securely from anywhere. We'll be happy to assist you with a free technology assessment if that would help you. And now I think we can open it up for a few minutes of questions if we have any. Brian, are you still there?
I'm still here, Wes. Thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions here? If you do, you may be muted. All right. Well, it doesn't seem so. If anyone does, feel free to reach out to us at AdvisorAssist or Wes directly. His contact information is here. Like I mentioned before, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation and a recording as well. Hopefully everyone got some good tips from the presentation. And like I said before, feel free to reach out if there's any questions. Thanks again.